Unit 6 introduces you, first of all, to the last of the three declensions of nouns. So a declension, just to remind you, is a class of nouns that have something in common in their inflectional categories. There isn't any difference in the functions of the inflectional categories. It's just a matter of the sounds, okay? So we've had all the nouns of the first declension, all the nouns of the second declension, and then so far none of the nouns of the third declension. And the third declension is the largest and the oldest class. So it has diversity. In other words, the book does its trick of saving up the difficult stuff for later. But these aren't that difficult. You'll see how it works out. These are nouns that are either masculine or feminine and neuter, okay? And one of the features that marks their archaism is that there is no difference formally in the endings of the masculine as against the feminine. They're the same to look at. The neuter has the kinds of differences that we're used to. But what Belisi has written up so beautifully with nice color coding on the blackboard is a version of the endings of the third declension noun that is slightly and significantly different from the diagram in the book. So I prefer that you look at this one, and I think it'll help you to understand. And I'll tell you about the differences. Okay, so what we're giving you is, these are the things that make the third declension the third declension. That is, these are the things that the nouns of the third declension have in common. These are the endings. Okay, that's what marks them. And the first problem with the third declension is that the nominative is not predictable anymore because the old ending of the nominative was S. All right, and I've given it there. The book does something which I don't think is correct. It says that there is no nominative ending, which isn't right. It's in the masculine and feminine, the nominative ending was an S, but S is an unstable sound in the language. So what happens is it disappears, it gets coalesces with other things. It means that you can't predict what the nominative is. And for the third declension, however, if you get the nominative and the genitive, those two things, then you can predict pretty much all of the rest of the paradigm. So when it comes to third declension nouns, those are the two things to learn. If you look them up in the dictionary and you see the way they're given in the vocabulary, you have to learn the nominative singular, whatever gender it is. Whoops.
Hold on. Right back.
Just walk by it. There we go. Thank you, Belisi. You have to learn the nominative singular masculine because that's not predictable anymore from the genitive, and the genitive because it's not predictable anymore from the nominative. You've learned this more or less already, for the book presents the nouns of the first and the second declensions as though this was the case, but really if you know the nominative of a first or second declension nouns and its gender, and you know what class it belongs to, you can do the rest of the paradigm, whereas in these cases you can't. Okay, so just a word to the wise, you got to learn nominative, genitive, and gender, because the gender, well, for some of them it's really easy to predict, for most of them actually, right? And then some of them you have to you just can't tell and you have to learn. But it's not the kind of problem that it is in some languages that have grammatical gender, and you can never tell what any given noun will be. From the form you can tell from many of these. All right, so let's get back to the list. The book, as I said, doesn't give you an ending for the nominative singular, but of the masculine and feminines, but it actually was an S, and the S disappears in some cases, or it appears in other cases. So it's good to know that it's there. Okay, you're going to see it. The genitive ending is always os, and that's for in the singular anyway, for all nouns, whatever class they are. The dative, again, for all nouns of whether they're masculine or feminine or neuter, is I. The accusative singular, as you notice, we've given you two alternatives. Sometimes it's alpha, and sometimes it's nu. Maybe you remember that those are actually originally the same sound, okay? That is, an original nu, okay, becomes an alpha in some cases. So that's why, for example, the negative prefix, which is un in English, as in unhappy, and in Latin as in infamous, okay, is in Greek as in athanatos or adikos, or and so forth. Okay, the N is originally a vocalic N, and it comes out as an alpha in Greek. But then there are some places where you actually have it as a nu in some words, like some very old words, like the word for sleepless in Greek is, well, anyway, we'll worry about these things later. But anyhow, there are places where you can see the N. Notice that in the singular, anyway, these nouns can and very often do have a separate vocative from the nominative. Not always, okay, but more often than in the first and second declension nouns. Remember, in the first and second declension nouns, we only had distinctive nominatives. In the second declension nouns, where you had for the nominative for the vocative singular, and the first declension nouns of the stratiotes type, where you have stratiota as the vocative singular. Everywhere else, the nominative and the vocative are the same. So in these, we're going to learn how it works, that you have a vocative with no ending. Okay, you'll see how this works. We're going to teach you some sound rules, which will make clear the consistency of the forms. So the plural endings are, notice the nominative plural is ess. The genitive plural, like for all Greek nouns, is on. The dative plural is se. Okay, again, begins with an s, which is going to cause us some problems. Okay, you need to maintain the morpheme boundary. In other words, in order to tell that a given noun is a dative plural, you need to be able to see or hear that se, okay? But it's going to do funny things to the consonants in front of it, okay, when there are consonants. And finally, as, that's an alpha there for the accusative plural for masculine and feminine nouns. The neuter forms are the same, except that the nominative, the accusative, and the vocative singular are all nothing. Okay, that's not a phi, that's a zero, or a zero with a line through it, okay, in the nominative singular, the vocative singular, and the accusative singular. Otherwise, the endings are either like the neuter nouns of the second declension, that is, they're alpha in the nominative and accusative and vocative plural, and then the genitive is on, and again, the dative plural is, as in for the masculine and feminines, it ends in se. That se can have a new movable after it. We should put that up there. So it can be sin in some cases. All right. So let's look at some examples. We've got on our next page three nouns, rather. We've got elpis, the word for hope or expectation. Ix, a noun, and that's he elpis, it's a feminine noun. We have ix, which can be either masculine or feminine. It's the word for goat, so it can be either he goat or she goat, okay? Or just goat, in which case it's masculine. And then charis, which is a really important cultural word in Greek. We get the English word charity from it, but it means a favor that you do for somebody. And in this society, reciprocal things, as you remember when we talked about guests and hosts and strangers, things that have to do, a favor is something that you give to somebody as though you're doing it generously, but you know you're going to get one back, right? It's the overt expression of reciprocal behavior, right? I'll do you a favor means you're going to owe me one later on, right? So this is a term in the reciprocal vocabulary. If you think about charity, when you give charity, you're supposed to get anything back?
Not physical.
You're not supposed to get anything back, but you're supposed to get prestige, right? Mm-hmm. And respect. So it's not so selfless as it seems. Anyhow, so not to give you social commentary and the course on Greek grammar, but anyhow, this is part of the institution. So the words are there. Let's look at these forms, okay? We're setting up a couple of things. There's a contrast in the forms of elpis and charis, but let's just look at them as examples of third declension nouns. If you see the nominative elpis, okay, the genitive is elpidos with a delta. And so you can see that all the other forms have the delta in it, elpidi, elpida, except for the vocative, where there once was a delta, but no Greek words end with those consonants anymore. The deltas, the taus, the thetas, the p, beta, phi, and the kappa, gamma, chi at the ends of Greek words all disappeared. So that's why there's nothing there. Okay. The plural is elpides, elpidon, elpisi, okay, which comes from elpid plus si. We're going to talk about that sound change. And then elpidas. So here are the endings we're talking about. You can see that elpisi, which gives you the dative plural where the delta disappears. The same thing is giving you the nominative, elpid plus s, the delta disappeared, so you have only the s, right? So there's a consistency to the sound changes here that we will try to teach you in a consistent way. The thing that we want to stress about this is there's our first example of the endings of a third declension noun and how visible they are. The fact that you need to know the nominative and the genitive, okay, and from the genitive and the nominative you can generate the rest, okay. The nominative gives you the form, in fact, that you see in the dative plural where there's the sound change, okay, so that's helpful. And lastly, we want to talk about the accusative singular. Remember, in our list of the endings of the third declension, the masculine and feminine ones, we have s, os, I, and either a or nu. Okay, elpida has an alpha. Okay, so let's go over to the end of the blackboard and look at the word charis. Okay, that has the nu in the accusative singular. So there's charis, charitos. There you can see that you have the ending with a T, all right? And charite, that's nu, that tau, okay? The older forms of charis don't have that T. But in the accusative singular, you see the fact that these nouns originally just ended with an I, and the accusative ending is the nu, okay? So there are some complicated things going on with these nouns, but the book gives you a rule of thumb. What's a rule of thumb? Okay, a rule of thumb is a bogus kind of rule. It doesn't explain anything, but it helps you to know something, okay? It's the kind of, it's helpful, but it's not scientific, okay? But let's stick with what's helpful. The rule of thumb about third declension nouns, about when they have an alpha in the accusative singular and when they have a nu, is this. When the iota in the inflection has an accent on it, as in elpis, you have alpha. When it doesn't have an accent, like in charis, you have a nu. It makes no sense, but it accounts for the phenomena, okay? No accent on the iota, you're going to have a nu. An accent on the iota, you will have an alpha. Okay? So that's a rule of thumb. It works. We can stop there. Okay? We've given you the word for goat, she-goat or he-goat, which can be either gender, for one simple reason, because of its accent. Okay? We're going to learn about noun accents. You maybe already have by the time you're looking at this video. And maybe you can see what's going on, especially with these nouns. It's really clear. That is, the accent on the third declension nouns tries to stay where it is in the nominative singular, okay? But in the case of the word for goat, ikes, which is a one-syllable word, something different happens. And so if you look at this, you've got ikes that has an acute accent on the alpha iota, but it moves to the last syllable in the genitive and the dative, both singular and plural. So instead of being igos, it's igos. And instead of being aige, it's aige. And then it goes back to aiga on the initial syllable in the accusative and in the vocative. Same is true of the plural. Aiges and igos have the accent on the first syllable, but aigon and aigse, okay, there's the dative plural ending, okay, have the accent on the last syllable. So monosyllabic nouns of the third declension, that's a pattern. So we're gonna learn some others that do that. If the nominative singular has only one syllable, the way it works is the genitive and the dative have accent on the last syllable. The nominative and the accusative have it on the initial one. All right, let's move on to the last page here, which last two pages, where we're teaching you some sound rules. This is one we've seen before, and we've seen it before in the context of learning how the future works. Do you remember this? So in the future, remember when the sign of the future in regular verbs in Greek is the sigma, and when you add it to a noun that ends with a consonant, and these are the stop consonants in Greek, p, beta, phi, are the ones you make with your lips. Kappa, gamma, chi are the ones that you make with your soft palate. And tau, delta, theta are the ones that Greeks actually made by touching their tongue to their teeth. We don't do that in English. Those are the dentals, okay? And notice what happens in each case. Whether it's a p or a beta or a phi, when you add s to it, it turns into p sigma or psi. In other words, it becomes the first one in the column. That is, you get p plus s. What the s does is to devoice and deaspirate. In the case of p, it doesn't change. Okay. In the case of kappa, gamma, and chi, okay, the same thing happens. It becomes ks, which we write as a xi. In the case of t, tau, delta, or theta, it became ts, and then it went through a bunch of changes, and it became just plain s. All right. So this helps us because the nominative singular, like for the word for goat, is you can see what the ending is in the genitive. You had ikes and igos. So when you add the s to the nominative, you get the gamma becomes a kappa. So you get ikes. When you look at the dative plural and you add ig plus si, you get ikes, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a way to remember, to help you out with the fact that the s is there as a nominative ending. How come the nominatives look the way they are, and how to deal with the dative plurals. We have one more chart for this problem, and that is when the third declension nouns end with other consonants than the stop consonants, okay? And they fall into certain patterns. So the first rule says that when the stem of the noun, and you can see that from the genitive, okay? When the stem of the noun ends with a nu or a sigma, and you add si to it, the nu or the sigma disappears. So for example, we're going to learn the word for Greek in Greek, Hellene, which means a Greek person. So Hellene, the genitive, you can write it up there. The genitive is Hellenos, Hellene with an acute on the eta. Okay, that's on the eta. Yep. Okay, all right.
Oh no, it disappeared. Helen.
Okay. No, it's on the epsilon. Sorry, not on the eta. My bad. Shoot.
It's not letting me do it. Okay.
All right. It's on the epsilon there. So, yeah, it's a big epsilon because it's.
I see what you're saying.
There you go.
Sorry.
All right.
It's not letting me do much. Here we go.
You're doing fine. There we go. All right. So that's the genitive of it. Okay. In the dative, it's Hellene plus si gives you Hellese. The nu disappears and you get Hellese. So that's a form that we're going to learn in this lesson. That means Hellene, which is what Greeks call themselves in the classical period, or Panhellenes. There are also a whole bunch of third declension nouns that end in either epsilon, nu, tau, ent, or ant, or aunt. And and tau as a combination are noun formants in Greek in third declension nouns. So for example, Belisi's written down the noun geron, which means an old man. Okay? It's masculine. The genitive of it, why don't you put that down, Belisi, is gerontos. Okay? And the gender is masculine. So when you add the si to an ONT or an ENT or an ANT, look what happens. The N and the T disappear, but you lengthen the vowel. If it's epsilon, it becomes EI. If it's alpha, it becomes long alpha. If it's omicron, it becomes OU. Okay? That's a lengthening principle that you have at a certain period of Greek. Not omega, not eta, but epsilon iota for epsilon and omicron upsilon for omicron. Okay? So if you want to learn those rules, fine, or you can just learn the dative plural when you learn the nominative singular, okay? But either way, it's worth getting a grip on how these sound changes happen in the third declension nouns. Thanks.